I know we've been real optimistic, but y'all tripping if you think y'all have at least one concern, and I'm going to tell you exactly what that is today here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. We're your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. You can also slide over to the YouTube page that is called Locked On Jaguars. Tap in, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe. Also hit that bell so you get notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And then wherever you get your audio podcast, make sure you hit that location up when you're in your car or at your job, at work, when you're trying to sneak so your boss doesn't see you. Make sure you hit that location up so you don't miss an episode of Locked On Jaguars. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Shout out to the everydayers that join the show. We love our everydayers, and you can be one of them. All you got to do is join us every day. That's why we call it everydayers. All right, let's get to it. By the time we end this 30-minute journey, I'm going to be able to explain the difference between understanding and believing. I know exactly what the Jaguars coaches have been trying to convey and do, especially at certain positions. Doesn't mean I have to believe it. Not disagreeing just to disagree. Sometimes you just don't believe in things. Doesn't mean it's not going to be happening the way that they want it to happen. So I'll explain all of that. The reason why I'm talking about that is because as a young man that I believe has been cooking up a lot of enthusiasm. Cooking is the operative word because it has some of the most horrendous food takes I've ever heard. But Anton Harrison, out of Washington, D.C., the starting right tackle for the Jacksonville Jaguars, happens to be the one player from different positional units. I looked at all of the units. Anton Harrison is the one player that if I could duplicate him for any unit on the team, if I could duplicate the best player of any unit, that's who it would be. I'm going to explain why that is significant because I'm going to start which unit concerns me most. And now you get it. You see exactly where we are going. You understand the roadmap. The roadmap was for me to take a look at the Jaguars team and to not be so blinded by my own personal enthusiasm that I didn't do what I love doing, especially for the listeners of Locked On Jaguars, and that is being totally honest, transparent, all of those things. So, you can formulate your opinion and be prepared for whatever you see this season. So I had to take a look at the team, and I tell you, there were a couple of units that got close. So here's the thing. The first thing I did was, instead of trying to ask myself which player I'd just rather duplicate for the team, which for all intents and purposes could have been just as easy. It could have been easier and an easier way for me to come up with the conclusion that I came up with because, well, as I sit here and I say that, it's probably the same person that I would have chosen. But I made sure and I did my due diligence. So what I did was I said, just break it down, man. Just break it down into unit position groups. Then pick the best player out of that position group. And what's the difference between the best player out of the group and the second best player out of the position group? The person with the biggest difference between number one and two, or the group with the biggest difference between number one and two, is probably the one where you want to add players. That is not necessarily the case because some positions have more positional value. Some positions require that there be more players who can play really, really well. As you can't hide certain players. You can't hide no offensive lineman. Y'all saw that the last couple of years with Luke Fortner. So when it comes down to it, I would rather have another dominant player on the offensive line. I think the defensive line is fine when it comes to who your best player is, which is probably Josh Allen, according to a lot of people. I would argue that, because of where he is right now in his career, that Trayvon is real close to that. And then you have Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton. Those guys are pretty good players. So, what would you duplicate? You want another Eric Armstead? Like, you got one already. And they just drafted Mason Smith. So I was thinking, defensive back. Okay, who's your best defensive back? What you want to do? You want a second Tyson Campbell? Tyson Campbell is one of the things that you have the biggest questions about, right? So what I did was I decided, I'm gonna push that back for a little bit. I decided what I do is just, Wig, what's the biggest concern you have on the team? The biggest concern I have on the team is offensive line. There you go. There's your answer. The biggest concern I have for the team is the offensive line. Now, this is where understanding and believing are different things. I did not say that I thought the offensive line was going to struggle, because Jaguar Twitter, y'all do it. Y'all do it every time. If I say that's my biggest concern, everybody will tell, Wig says the offensive line stinks. No, it's not what I said. I said that's my biggest concern for the team. I'm not worried about Trevor Lawrence, but there are a lot of people that are worried about Trevor Lawrence or focused on Trevor Lawrence, and those same people won't even focus on who's blocking for him, because they don't want to factor whether somebody has to be blocking for him or not. They don't want that to be in consideration of a reason why that they got to give a bad take again on our quarterback. All of that matters. It matters fully. Trust me. Everything matters. You got to be able to block for him. You got to be able to protect him. The offensive line is the biggest problem. It's the biggest concern. Now, if you look back at what they did in the offseason, you'd have sat there and thought the defensive line was their biggest problem. They fired all the defensive coaches, then added more talent on the defensive line than they did anywhere. There's a reasonable explanation for that, though. It's because the new guy comes in and you need to get him what he needs to run his system. Can't just improve. You got to improve the big way. You can't just go make little improvements. You got to make big improvements. And that's what they believe they did on the defensive line. But for me, the biggest concern comes back to the offensive line. As I watched those games last year, and there was a lot of stuff you could point to that was a real big issue for the Jaguars. And sometimes it changed, because remember, we used to always talk about how they didn't do the same things every other week, and then they started finding different ways to do bad stuff, right? So every week, was different with the Jaguars. Every single week was different. So the thing is the one constant that they had was, as I watched those games, I never felt like the offensive line was like just dominating people. I never felt like they were just busting people in their mouth. I get envious and I get jealous. And this is a sign that I'm getting a little bit older. You can call it older. I'm not saying it in a negative way. It could be more mature. It could be older and wiser, like you're wiser young fella, right? Or old fella. You know what I'm saying? It could be just that I'm starting to realize the importance of the little things. The little thing that happens to be a very big thing, offensive linemen are very big people. And it also happens to be a huge part of the football team, but it's little in terms of what people talk about. You notice people never really talk about the offensive line. This is the thing, and this might be true about all positions, but it's really true about offensive linemen as a group. You talk about offensive linemen I think the number one time that people talk about offensive linemen in a negative way is when they're terrible. Or period, is when they're bad. Then maybe at the end of a game, in a real good game, in a big moment in the playoffs, you'll get an analyst that, wow, man, this offensive line is really doing great. But they really don't get the credit they deserve, but they'll get the blame for everything when things go wrong. So, yeah, the offensive line concerns me. So now this pushes us to segment 2. When I ask the question, the player I love to duplicate the most, I'm going to let you know right now who it is, but I'm going to tell you, just because I give you who it is, isn't going to take away from all the goodness of me telling you why I chose him. It is Anton Harrison. Of course it is. Bad food takes it all. That is the person on the Jacksonville Jaguars team that I would duplicate at his position before I duplicate anyone else at their position to help the Jaguars. It's pretty much self-explanatory, but just in case you need me to explain it, I'm going to do it for you right here in just a second on Locked On Jaguars. Y'all better get in on FanDuel, man. FanDuel is the absolute truth. And if you are new to FanDuel, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. I know sometimes it's hard. It's hard to figure out who's going to win a game, not to mention when you put your money where your mouth is, especially in the NBA with their low management and all of those things, and not knowing who's going to play. Well, guess what? It's going for the playoffs now. The Western Conference semifinal, they have one game left. Ain't no load management. It's every man on deck. And the NHL is going hard right now, too, trying to crown their champion. You get $150 to put on spreads, money lines, and player props if you have a winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count in both the NHL and the NBA. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you for joining me again here on Locked On Jaguars. We're at your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. We're talking about the difference between understanding and believing. When a football team does a lot of things in the offseason, all the things make sense until they don't, right? Until the guys start playing. And then, you have to decide each and every year before that happens whether or not you believe what they're saying or what they understand. And to do that, you have to take a hard inventory of what the team is. I talked about which unit most concerns me, and then that led me to this. Put your money where your mouth is. I said it was the offensive line. Okay, so tell me, if there was one player on this team that you could duplicate for his unit, for his positional room, who would it be? Anton Harrison is that dude. And it's not just because the offensive line is the biggest concern for me. It is because the offensive line is such an important part of a National Football League team, especially one that wins a title or competes for a championship. It's the one unit that I believe of those important units of the trenches that I don't think has a second dominant player. I believe the defense has Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker already. And then add in the fact that they have added Eric Armstead, and they have some new hope too, and a couple of 300-pounders from the SEC that they got in the draft. The wide receiver room, I don't need to duplicate anything. I want to see what those guys are. I want to see what our new first-round pick is, and I want to see Christian Kirk in the slot all the time because he has healthy reinforcements behind him. And Gabe Davis back home as a number 2, as a big receiver with some catch radius. I'm fine with that receiver group. They got some young players too, some young guys that represent a little bit of depth. So, yeah, I'm fine with all. So, yeah, Anton Harrison is my guy. Plus, I like it. Shout out to him too, man, because he is bold. He is giving away some incredible food and advice. But some of it is bad too. Okay, some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's regional. But this is why I like him, and I think stuff like this is going to endear him to the fans because he's every man. The offensive line is the most every man position, even though every man can't do it. They just feel like people that are just like us, right? Everyday dudes. I just think everything about Anton Harrison is what you want. And I just imagine if they get another guy, doesn't have to be a tackle. When I say duplicate, I don't mean give me somebody who's exactly like him. I mean, give me someone who is at that level that can play, and he's versatile because he can play both tackle positions, but give me another dude that's at that level, at that age, about that size, at that position, in that group with him. I want 2 of them. He'd be the first person. He'd be the first, and probably Trayvon would be number 2 because you can't have too many of them, but they don't really need that right now on this team. Some people will say they do, that they need extra help, but that's overkill. I mean, for me, that would be a luxury. This would be an absolute upgrade on their offensive line if they could get another person as good as him. So that being said, taking myself through that that mental exercise gave me the ammunition to give y'all the opinion that that's where my concern lies most with this team. It really, really does. I think, though, with the fans, with the way the temperature gauge that I have on the fans, if I could be my own thermostat here for my topic, is that most of the fans are worried about the DBs, specifically Tyson Campbell in this new defense. Most fans, and more specifically than that, corner as a whole. I think fans are concerned about the cornerback position. And that's because the corners are going to be put in more of those situations and circumstances that if they don't do what they're supposed to do, they can get embarrassed and this team could look really, really bad. It's going to be one-on-one. Miss a tackle and it might be over. You know? So I do believe that the onus is, a lot of the fans believe the onus is on the team, that the DBs weren't that great anyway, but now you're actually asking them to do something that you need better DBs in order to get that done. That's a hard thing for some people to get past and swallow. And I get it. Because the offensive line, with all, as much as, I've been talking about that, for years, but you pretty much, who they are and you think they're going to be a little bit better because of Mitch Morse. And you also believe that they know, because you're running it back with all the same people, they pretty much know exactly what it is that they're supposed to be doing. These DBs are doing some new stuff. And from the sound of it, at least from the things that we've heard, right? From the sound of it, they're going to be doing things that don't necessarily match up with what we have been led to believe all of this time. We've been led to believe this entire time that these were things that they did not do or did not describe their skill set as we knew it. So I understand. I definitely understand any and everybody that has those concerns about the DBs. I don't have those concerns, not as much as everyone else. I don't necessarily have those concerns. I don't have those. I don't have that much trepidation about the defensive backs. Maybe because they finally did go out and openly address a serious replacement or a serious slot guy in Darnell Savage. They are going to put it on the players. This is what I really, really like about this. It gets rid of the way they're going to play and the way they're going to coach. It's going to provide an opportunity for some dangerous stuff to happen. But one thing it's going to do is going to get rid of this. And this is what you have to understand. It's going to get rid of trying to figure out when things go wrong, what was at fault. Is it the scheme? Is it the coaches? Does what they asked or what you ask them to do, does it match up with the players that they have? Was it technique? Was it this? Was it that? See, when you have a system where guys depend on the system and it has to be like, for instance, you say, well, Tyson Campbell is this type of player and he plays better doing this. So when you have this system that makes guys comfortable, you're matching your system up to what guys do. And that's the way a lot of people believe football should be played. I think when you're Ryan Nielsen, you do that to a certain extent, but there are some things that are non-negotiable. If we are going to be a pressure team that rushes the passer, that's going to be aggressive, then we have to line up and play with an aggressive manner. We can't be, well, I'm going to line up and do whatever this guy does best. To a certain extent, that's true, but not really. Because if I can't line up and play him in an aggressive way, then it's going to tell me he's not the one that needs to be here. So that's the thing that this is going to do. Having a defense or an offense that goes I'm going to just put you in a position to make a play, and you got to do it. And we're going to coach you up and teach you how to do it. But this is what it is. It's either you or him. One of y'all going to eat, one of you not. You got to figure out if you have those type of guys. And that's what I like about what is going on. That's why I want to explain the difference between understanding and believing. There's no right or wrong in not believing in something. It's only wrong when you don't try to understand it. So I'll explain that to you after I let y'all know that Locked On has started. That's right. The first ever 24/7 sports streaming channel. That's right, on Amazon Fire TV. If you're watching Fox Sports and ESPN all day, you got to turn that volume down because they're yelling and screaming and yelling and screaming. Well, you don't have to worry about that at Locked On Sports Today. You get it from all the local experts with all of the stories, the biggest stories from the world of sports. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Going to talk about the difference between understanding what the coach is doing and believing in it, and why there's no right, wrong, or indifferent way to go about that. We'll do it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored by eBay Motors, man. Passion, drive, and patience. They're all the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep the ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We have been discussing which unit concerns me the most. I went through a little bit of my decision-making process and told you the player I'd like to duplicate the most is also representative of the unit that I am most afraid of, and that is the offensive line. And the person I'd love to duplicate the most for this team is Anton Harrison. Now, understanding and believing and why they're different. When I say the Jaguars need more offensive line and I'm more concerned with it, the first thing I usually get back when we do our interaction is this. This is why this is stuff like what I'm about to do now is why when folks ask me on social media certain questions, I say, you got to listen to the podcast. Because for me to respond back, sometimes it doesn't really give you the exact meaning in those short characters. So here you go. I'm gonna give you my best answer for it. Usually what I get is when I talk about the offensive line, this is the first thing I get. Folks start going down the line and saying they drafted this, they drafted that, they drafted this, they drafted that. I don't want my comments to be misconstrued as that the Jaguars haven't used resources to go out and get, like they totally ignored the offensive line. That's not what I'm trying to say. They haven't done a good enough job. And the reason why I say that too is because it's not just on the surface looking at what they tried to do and who they did it with and what they were trying to accomplish. It's the importance of protecting Trevor Lawrence. It takes precedence. And for me, there ought to be a certain level of overkill when it comes to ensuring that your quarterback is upright. I think when you believe you have a franchise quarterback, you have to give them more. You hear so many people say a franchise quarterback doesn't need a whole bunch of stuff because he's so good, he lifts people up. That's true. I think Trevor Lawrence has lifted this team up a little bit. The other thing is what those folks don't tell you is when they say that is the franchise quarterback that wins a bunch of Super Bowls usually has a whole bunch of stuff around him too. Joe Montana actually had the greatest wide receiver to ever play, and a whole bunch of other Hall of Famers. Tom Brady had a lot of Hall of Famers on his team, had the greatest coach to ever coaching the other side of the ball. You go back and look at all of the things that those folks had, man, that won multiple Super Bowls. This isn't just about having a great player or a guy that people identify with because he has long hair or somebody that's recognizable that puts eyes on your franchise. All of that stuff is true too. What this is about is this. This is about, are you doing enough? And giving the person that has the most talent more resources to work with is a recipe for success. Instead of worrying about whether or not the dude has all of these superpowers to lift everybody up around him, we ought to worry about the dude who has all of these superpowers, and then we're giving him a cheat sheet to go along with it. That's why you win a lot when stuff like that happens. So I understand the fact that the Jaguars have made trades for Ezra Cleveland. I understand that they went out and signed Brandon Sheriff, who is a former All-Pro. I understand that they drafted Anton Harrison in the first round, and that they drafted Walker Little in the second round, and that they have Cam Robinson, a veteran who was a second-round pick, and they lost Jawan Taylor, who was a second-round pick. I get that they're trying to they drafted Luke Fortner with the third-round pick, and they signed Mitch Morse as a veteran from a playoff team with all of that experience, and that they're trying to develop Cooper Hodges at the same time. I know that they're having a very layered approach to how they're trying to move about fixing their offensive line. That still doesn't mean that I believe that just because they tried to fix something that they actually did it. That's the point that I'm making. And in my heart of hearts, the thing that concerns me the most about this team is their offensive line. And as much as I want to tell you that it's something different, I can't lie to you. That's not the case. That is what concerns me. Even while I understand and I can take inventory with every little thing that they did and every move that they made in order to try to shore up that position group, it still, to me, falls short. So at some point you go, well, how do we fix it? Well, first of all, we got to see if they've fixed it this year. If they have, we're going to give them credit. If they haven't, we're going to revisit this subject and we're going to revisit this conversation. And when we do, that's when I'll provide you the answer on what I think they need to do. But at that point, if I have to start providing those answers, that means a whole bunch of people that's in position that the positions that they're in right now are going to be in a little bit of trouble. You guys won't be in trouble here with me on Locked On Jaguars. I'm trying to answer the questions that you guys have without being obvious about it, right? We're kind of doing it in long form. When we do the shows, what we do is we take a whole pot of gumbo full of all of the ideas and the questions and things that everyone wants to hear. I want Locked On Jaguars to be the place that you can come and get the answers to the questions that you want, that you have, and get answers to questions you didn't know that you have and you didn't know that you even wanted to know. That's what I'm trying to do here. So we're going to continue to have these discussions about the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'm glad you're going to be here with me because you're the everydayers, and without you, there is no me. It's your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Take care of yourself and each other. Until next time.